Well, we will start in a minute. If you could please take your seat. Ça va? Please take a seat. We'll get started. Good morning and welcome to today's second session. We will focus on the investor's role in the race to zero. In particularly, how do we shift building investments towards Paris alignment? I realize I don't have the clicker. Sorry, maybe a bit late. Thank you. This session is organized by the Program for Energy Efficiency in Buildings, the PEEB, under the umbrella of the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction. The PEEB is the co-chair of the Work Area 4 in the Global Alliance, which deals with finance. And PEEB is also leading some of the policy work in the Global Alliance. And co-organized by WBCSD, World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and we lead the Work Area 3 under the Global Alliance, which is on market transformation. So how do we work with a very fragmented sector, align companies along the value chain to reach net zero? And so we're very happy to co-organize this meeting today, because obviously market transformation needs the finance and also needs the pressure and the push from finance to actually happen. Yesterday, thank you. Do I just say next? Okay. So my name is Roland Honsecker and I'm the Director for Built Environment at the WBCSD. Just a reminder, the session is recorded. For those who are joining us online, you can send us questions and I will do my best to pick them up over Slido and the code 400272. And I'll be happy to pick some out if I'm able. Next slide. So we'll first hear inspiring talk from Bertrand Piccard, the head of the Solar Impulse Foundation. We will then have a short talk with Mathilde Bord-Laurent from the Agence Française de Développement, and we will then have a panel, partly virtual, partly in person, to go into more depth on the financial solutions for the built environment. Maybe just before we start, yesterday we launched the market transformation work for the Global Alliance for Buildings. So what do we mean by that? We know that to get to net zero in the built environment, we need to have emissions by 2030. That means any new constructions need to be net zero in operation by 2030. And they should reduce their gray carbon, the gray energy, we call it embodied carbon, by 40 to 50% at least, while we also retrofit radically the existing building stock. And by 2050, everything has to be net zero along the full life cycle of buildings. So both energy, but also what comes from emissions that come from construction and materials. So it's a huge task, and we need to align the whole value chain from the material providers to construction companies, design firms, to the developers and investors and the end users to really achieve that goal together. Because from a company perspective, my scope 3 is someone else's scope 1 and 2. So I need to work together to reduce that. And we need to do it holistically. So in the market transformation, we're talking about the 3 key levers, which are whole life carbon. We need to assess all emissions in any projects we do. And we need to start looking at carbon as we do cost. So we need to really put them next to it, and then we can drive that conversation. Because very often, reducing carbon also reduces costs. But you have to do it at the beginning of projects. And that leads to the last lever, which is to change the demand-supply relationships. We talk about that importance of the demand-side signal. If end users, global tenants, developers and investors start putting requirements for lower carbon performance, then the sector can really bring the solutions and bring the innovations to reach that. And that will accelerate. And we are convinced that the 50% is possible, at least for new build. That is possible by 2030, but it means we have to start today. So with that, I would really like to invite now Bertrand up to the stage, and you always give us a positive message on the solutions that are being worked on. Thank you, Bertrand.
Thank you for the invitation, and good morning to everyone. When you hear the magnitude of the task of being carbon neutral in the construction and carbon neutral in the buildings where people live, you can believe, wow, that's completely impossible. It's going to be really expensive. You can be depressed, you can be anxious, and you can think the task is so big that I'm never going to succeed, so let's not start. But there's a completely other way to see the situation. And this is what I learned with the Solar Impulse project. You know, what was the big learning of Solar Impulse was not only that we could fly on solar power. It was mainly that we could fly by being efficient, energy efficient. Because the people that I contacted in the beginning in the aeronautical industry to build the plane told me, you can never do that because the sun is not giving enough energy to keep an airplane in the air day and night. Okay, this is the way people think usually. Always in terms of production, but not in terms of efficiency. That means in reducing consumption. And this is what we have done with Solar Impulse. We've done an airplane that was so energy efficient that it could fly day and night with the power of a scooter, just using the energy from the sun. And this is what we have to keep in mind today. Today, we are doing the opposite. We are like a stupid guy in a bathtub with a leak, and instead of solving the leak, the guy is putting the tap wide open to add more water and compensate the water he's losing. This is what we have now in the building industry. It's exactly this. We have buildings that are so energy inefficient that the dirty energies that are used to heat or cool the building is lost. But this is not just an ecological problem. It's an economical problem. It means that the people living in the buildings are paying twice or 3 times or 4 times the amount of the bill that the technology could allow them to pay. So it's clear that we have to turn the situation, or let's say the problem that we face, into an opportunity for the population. Let's not say it's difficult to make building carbon neutral. Let's say we're going to work hard to make the cost of the energy the cost of the living in the new buildings, or even the old buildings if we can retrofit them, much more affordable. And here we have identified, because if it's affordable, it means that it needs to be profitable for the people who install all these systems, who make the building carbon neutral. And we have launched with the Solar Impulse Foundation a challenge of identifying 1,000 or more than 1,000 technological solutions that can be financially profitable and at the same time can protect the environment. And today we have reached the level of 1,300 of these solutions, so much more than what we expected. And a huge part of them are for buildings, which is good because the buildings represent a tremendous amount of CO2 emissions, and the technology that we have today, without additional innovation, just what we have today, allows to solve the biggest part of the problem. There are enough insulations that are cheaper to buy in order to depreciate the cost just over the energy saving. There are ways now to heat the buildings in completely new ways. And it's interesting to see that one of these systems has been developed by an oil company, oil exploration company. It's Schlumberger, who has made a spin-off called Celsius, and they drill wells of 200 meters in the center of the cities to install heat pumps in urban areas. Usually it's heat pumps that were for only individual buildings. Today, it can be done for huge buildings in the center of the cities. So it starts to be possible to have efficient heating, efficient cooling, like for example, NG with the district cooling that they install in Dubai. Very innovative possibilities to insulate the buildings and be, at this stage today, almost carbon neutral and profitable for the people who sell these systems or this insulation or these new materials, and for the people who use them. I believe this is the message. This is really an important message, because we can reconcile ecology and economy. We can turn the problem into an opportunity and put a lot of people on our side in order to do these transformations. Now, of course, it needs a legal trigger, because usually the person who is investing in the building as the owner of the building is not the one who is making the savings. Because the people who rent the flat make the saving, and the investor is the owner. So we need to find a solution, a legal solution, but this is just legislation or regulations, in order to be able to take a part of the saving made by the people renting the flat in order to pay back for the investment. NG is doing something very, very clever. They invest at the place where the energy is consumed, and they share the profit directly with the people using the energy. So it's not the owner of the house who makes the investment, it's the energy provider in a contracting agreement. So we see that everything's in place. Now we need to build the buildings also in an efficient way and in a profitable way. And as you were saying in the introduction, and this is something that my colleague Rémi Kalter in my team is very keen about, it's all the lock-in effect. The buildings that are built today are going to pollute for 10, 20, 30 years. So it's obvious that we have to use materials today in another way. And usually we're accusing the cement industry to be the huge polluter for the construction business. Today, it's interesting to see that they are part of the solution. We are observing very closely what Holcim is doing, because we have labeled several of their solutions. Today, you have cement that is half the CO2 emissions and absolutely profitable in terms of product. There is a way to reuse the demolition waste to put it into the concrete. There are platforms now created between the people demolishing buildings and the one constructing buildings in order to use the demolition waste. You have the goal, and I think it will happen quite soon, of a type of cement that is absorbing more CO2 during the fabrication process. So it will be a carbon negative cement. So there is a lot of hope because solutions exist now and solutions are profitable. But they have to be used because you cannot imagine how people are lazy, how people are afraid of change, and sometimes how people are complacent or even stupid with the opportunities they miss. You have a lot of people who keep incandescent light bulbs in their buildings because they don't want to pay for the upfront investment of LED bulbs. So there needs to be also the support of regulation in order to oblige the use of the most efficient systems. And because these most efficient systems are profitable, we can impose them. It would be very difficult to oblige people to use the tough standards if it was a cost for them. But you really have to keep in mind that the situation is now completely reversed. It's not a cost, it's a real profit. And even for the retrofit of buildings. I was talking a few months ago with the president of the French metropole. And he told me, yes, I know that we have to retrofit the buildings, but we don't have the money for that. And I told him, but it is profitable. He says, I never heard it's profitable. And then I was talking with people providing all the materials for the retrofit. They told me, of course it's profitable. Of course, and we have all the examples that are labeled in our foundation about all these solutions that are at the same time ecological and profitable. So you see, I'm repeating several times now this link between profitability, efficiency, ecology, economy, investment, return on investment. The situation has changed, but so many people have not yet understood that the situation has changed. So it's also a question of communication. The technology is here. Let's communicate a little bit more about what we can do to have a modern world, bringing the world from the past, inefficient and polluting systems, into the present with efficient and profitable solutions.
Thank you so much, Bertrand. I was not mistaken. You would give us an uplifting introduction. The solutions are there. And also interesting to hear that the CO2 is starting to become a driver of innovation. I think you gave excellent examples, but the market is very slow, is inert. Now you have collected over 1,000 solutions, I understand, 1,300 or so. Do you start seeing how they're being used, how they are being deployed? And will you somehow be able to measure also the impact that will have going forward?
Yes, some of them come from startups. And they start as a startup with one client, 2 clients, 4 clients, and it's long before you see it's an exponential curve. Now, other solutions come from big corporations, like Holcim, like Schlumberger with Celsius. And here, of course, it's going much faster, much faster. So when we hear about a big company producing cement, who's starting to make carbon-neutral cement, we should not accuse them of greenwashing, like a lot of NGOs are doing. We need to support them. We need to push them, of course.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Bertrand. And please do stay with us if you can.
With pleasure.
And with that, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, I would like to now ask Mathilde to join us up here, and we'll have a short coffee talk without coffee. I'll join you over there. I'll go. Mathilde.
Good morning.
Bord-Laurent, you are the head of climate division at the Agence Française du Développement. So thank you very much for being with us this morning. I know that you wanted to start by reacting to some of Bertrand's introduction. Please go ahead.
No, thank you, Bertrand. It's inspiring. I see you COP after COP talking, I don't know if he's still around, but talking about many new technologies, and this is very important. Just a quick reaction. Having those technologies available is a great achievement. Making sure that it's available in the developing countries is another part of the work, and certainly not the easiest, and part of the work on which the French Development Agency has been very active. But we need to work on both sides, yeah, of course.
Excellent. I'd like to ask you, what is the role of finance? Why do we need finance to drive the change in the building sector? And what are the development benefits you see from the work you are leading with the IFD and the Program for Energy Efficiency in Buildings in particular?
A lot to say about those two questions. First, I'd like to thank you and to thank the organization for the invitation. It's very important to talk about building. I'm now heading the climate team within IFD, but I was previously in charge of the energy sector, and I worked hard to have the building agenda getting more strength within our funding, being successful, and José will come back on this. And it's critical. You didn't give so many figures, so maybe I can drop a few.
Please do. Figures
on the importance of the topic. Buildings and construction make up almost 40% of global greenhouse gases emissions, and of course, therefore, are a major driver of global warming. The energy demand for the building sector is expected to grow by 50% by 2050, and energy needs for space cooling are predicted to triple by 2050, especially in hot and tropical countries, mainly in residential buildings. So what does this figure say? Of course, it drives quite rapidly. We are talking about AC for the last figure I dropped, space cooling. AC means decarbonation. Okay, fine. This is one important thing to do, but it's not the first one that we need to do. We must first work to improve to build properly. So first is building properly our building to reduce first the need for any future energy uses, including air conditioning. Then, second, we must make sure to use energy efficient appliances, and this is where notably the technology comes in line. And at the end of the day only, we need a decarbonized mix. But it's in this order that we must work and develop policies, standards, and works on capacity building and making sure the whole value chains of the market follow this move. This is a lot to do. Of course, it's really very important, especially in the developing countries, where we are building the equivalent of the Paris area every week. I remember the first time in my first event on buildings, when I heard this figure, I was myself impressed, coming more for a power sector side of this image, which is really striking. At the French Development Agency, when we have taken the commitment to be fully aligned with the Paris Agreement, which these commitments take back from 2017, we were the first development finance bank to take this commitment. We thought, okay, we need to therefore to also take a step back on our energy transition strategy and have a look on what it means. We were working previously mainly on the power sector side, and we said, I think we need to think about energy differently, and we need to think about energy as a cross-cutting issue, and therefore look for energy efficiency possibilities and potential in all our investment programs. And there was the Program for Energy Efficiency in Buildings, which had been launched right after the Paris Agreement itself. And this tool became very instrumental, mainstreamed in all our investments. We consider an investment, anytime we're building a house, a school, or a hospital, that this project is not aligned if it is not energy efficient. And it is processed internally. And I think for bankers in the futures, for development financial institutions especially, this is something on which they really need to work so that it's really part of their internal assessment of the programs. Regarding the benefits, because you already asked the question, there are many, of course. The first one is job creation. The building sector represents 7% of global employment, providing 220 million jobs. You know, I need my paper for the figures. And it's even more important if you try to work with more traditional, locally adapted construction methods. This is something on which recycling cement will create jobs, that's for sure. Working also with traditional construction ways should be also a very good one for job creation. The second is, of course, better resilience. A building which is properly built is helping coping with the future impact of climate change. You know that in some schools in Africa, the kids, the children just can't work when the temperature is above 40 degrees. So you have this kind of impacts that if you build properly the school, if you manage to change the standards, the building codes, which is imposed to all small schools being built in rural areas, you have a direct impact on the way those kids will learn at school. The third would be health, of course. There are many co-benefits coming from how you currently, depending on where you live, how you cook, notably has impact on the air quality, and therefore many impacts on the health of the population. And the last benefit was referred to by Bertrand Piccard is, of course, that you save money. People save money. And it reduces the energy poverty in the countries where it's well implemented.
Thank you, Mathilde. Whenever I hear about the benefits, they are so overwhelming that it's still puzzling that the sector itself, and also Bertrand said that really nicely, it is somehow not able to pick even the low-hanging fruit. So the role of development banks, how can you help transform this sector, and how do you engage with obviously the local banks, but then also with the sector itself?
It's really hard work. It's something that you can't take isolated. You can't just come with funding. You need to come and approach the stakeholders locally, public and private. You need to discuss with the architects. You need, and José, I'm sure, will elaborate on this. You need to discuss with the ministries to work on the public policies. You need to set step by step the standard at the level at which locally people can build. Elsewhere you have plenty of standards which are not applied because you still need to build houses, but people don't know yet how to do it with respecting those standards. So standard by itself is not sufficient. Regulation is not sufficient. So you really need to work locally with all the stakeholders. I know the GlobalABC also is working a lot at this level, creating alliances in each country, building together public and private sector to discuss on how to handle this. So this is one. Then still, our job is still to support the policymakers in doing the right policies and creating the proper standards. They will need to reinforce the capacities also of the ministries to check on the fact that these standards will be respected. This is something which is not easily done, especially in the developing countries. And then it's a question of making sure that the financiers, indeed, as I explained earlier, take really this into account as a requirement also in the project that they are doing. I mean, if us at AFD, we are able to do it, Imagine if all the local public development banks, which are financing many public buildings, many hospitals, social housing, and which are our peers in those countries, start to have the same type of requirement. It means that no social housing in South Africa or in Nigeria will be built without an energy efficiency requirement. This work, we are starting to do this, to engage the local banks, starting with the public development banks because they are our peers, to implement and think about creating the same type of tools that we have with our program for energy efficiency in building, so that it duplicates the effort with their capacities and their knowledge of what is doable on the ground. And this has a huge potential for much bigger money on energy efficient buildings. Just a figure, those public development banks globally represent 10% of the annual investment, public and private investment in the world. So if you change how those banks are working, you have a big impact.
That's another really important figure, those 10%. I was not aware it's actually that high. This is a big lever. And as you say, the engagement is important. It's not just finance, but really the applying of standards, policies, etc. And we will go into a bit more detail on that with José, on the PEEB itself. I'd like to thank you very much for sharing these opening words with us. Would you like to, do you have any final message before we let you go?
Thank you, no, and I wish you, of course, a very, very fruitful discussion, and very pleased with José to answer the question afterwards. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mathilde. Thank you. Yes, you can leave it here. I would now like to ask the panelists who are here in the room to join me up on stage. If you want to take these two seats here. Just a reminder for people online, you can use Slido if you want to send me some questions, and I will do my best to pick them up and bring them into the discussion. So, José Lopez, thank you for being with us. You are the lead of the program for energy efficiency in buildings. Kelly Clark, thank you, and I'm sorry we weren't able to say hi before, but nice to meet you. I'm Roland, and you are the Director of Finance and Capital Market Transformation at the Laudes Foundation. And then I would also like to welcome remotely, joining us virtually, and I hope it works. Yes, here we go. Edith Castro Bedoya, you are the Director of Business Relationship for the Home Developers at Sociedad Hipotecaria Federal in Mexico. And Brendan Wallace, you're the co-founder and managing partner at Fifth Wall, a global venture capital firm. So thank you all for joining us. Can you hear us online?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. We can hear you as well. So these hybrid discussions are starting to be fun because they force us all a bit out of our comfort zone. So I hope you'll be fine with that as well. I'd like to start with you, José, if I may. Yes, you. It will be easier to hear you this way. Could you maybe talk to us a little bit more about the mandate of the PEEB, what financial solutions you see also starting to be deployed in the countries where you work in? So Mathilde already pointed to some of that, but if you can fill us in a bit more. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for attending the meeting. Yes, the PEEB is an initiative that was launched at Marrakesh. It's a joint initiative with Germany, France and Germany, and GIZ and AFD are the main implementing agencies. So PEEB has been designed as a facility to extend support at institutional regulatory level on one side, capacity level, but also has been conceived as a financing facility, means to operate on field to develop concrete projects And the concept, in fact, the concept is based on the synergy between actions aimed to increase capacities of local actors and the development of concrete projects that can impact the building chain value. So we operate since 4 years, almost 4 years, and we have been able to deliver quite interesting results in many countries. In 5 countries, we have developed a full package of services, means we have been able to work at regulatory level, establishing dedicated standards for building constructions, but as Mathilde was mentioning previously, based also on accurate knowledge of the capabilities of local actors. And this is very important, not to set regulation for regulation, but set regulation for action. And implementing in the meantime project, we have been able to establish a dialogue between the regulatory level and the building construction sector, and better tune the specification in terms of construction. First, this was certainly the main achievement of this program. The second is that we are also involving countries in long-term process, and we are working with them in the design of or update of national determined contributions for the building sector, and this is very, very important too. And lastly, we have designed and implemented large-scale capacity building programs in 5 countries: Senegal, Morocco, Tunisia, Vietnam, and Mexico. On the project side, in terms of implementation, we are now currently working with 30 projects in 20 countries, and this represents a pipeline of more than 3 billion euro investment. Means that we are playing at large scale. So we are in capacity to impact the market, because the programs we are developing are quite attractive also for the construction sector. So setting more ambitious requirements in the procurement documents provokes an alignment of the construction sector to these new standards. So it's quite interesting process. I would like to say also that PEEB is for AFD, the tool for mainstreaming energy efficiency in all the activities on financing we are extending. Means that nowadays all project with a building component is being assessed and challenged in terms of energy efficiency. When the building is not able, the project is not able to achieve at least 20% of savings compared to the baseline, so the reference situation in the country, the project is not qualified in terms of climate finance. Means for us a strong pressure, because as Mathilde said, nowadays 50% of our financing at AFD is qualified as climate finance. So it's becoming a really a strong tool for the transformation of our practices at AFD, and now the challenge is also to share this experience with other development banks, is what we are doing now, initiating with our colleagues from GIZ, with IDFC, and tomorrow we will have a side event dedicated to this subject, or to involve more development bank in the process of promotion of energy efficiency in the building sector.
That's excellent, thank you. And really that collaboration across banks as well brings even more scale.
Exactly.
So you're saying 20% reductions over the current kind of energy performance is the requirement to be labeled as climate finance.
At least,
in
but
your, at least,
at least, but with 20%, you get a level of climate finance that is a small percentage of what you are allocating.
Yeah.
If you want to get 70% of climate finance or qualify your financing at a level of 70%, you have to achieve 40%.
I was just going to ask you, do you give incentives to be even better?
40% improvement compared to the baseline. And in addition, we are challenging the project not in terms of mitigation, but also in terms of adaptation. And we are also giving percentage of climate finance for this part. And all our projects are challenged in terms of resilience to the increase of temperature. Means that the efficiency is assessed with the projection of temperature in 2050. So the thermal simulations we are doing for the project we are financing have to demonstrate they are resilient to the temperature we will have in 40 years or 30 years now.
Excellent. Thank you, Jose. I have obviously many more questions to what you're raising, but if you allow me, I'd like to maybe turn to the next speaker and to have a bit of a conversation as well. Edith, I'd like to come to you. You have a long experience in affordable housing in Mexico and in mortgage financing for housing developers. And Mexico is a member of the GlobalABC and developing a national alliance. So how do you bring the actors together in this journey to decarbonize the sector, but also bring in all population so that it's a solution for all? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the invitation. SHF has merged a set of initiatives that encourage affordable homes construction in Mexico, contributing to tackle climate change and increasing social welfare. Those homes evaluated with tailored tools ensured at least 20% of CO2 emissions reductions, over 40% of comfort level increases, and better urban environment and low carbon footprint at the same cost than a conventional housing. This is possible due to inclusive financial mechanism financed by the German Development Bank, KfW, and the IDB, through concessional loans and grants with funding of the European Union Climate Technology Fund, German and English government. In order to mitigate and compensate climate change, the international funding allows us to offer financial incentives through financial intermediaries to developers that receive lower interest rates together with free technical assistance that persists compensate additional costs of sustainable measures implementations. Our main product, EcoCasa, is a leading worldwide program that encourages massive sustainable affordable homes construction. Our NAMA first tailored program worldwide that strengthens sustainable technical capabilities and small and medium developers and LAIF, the first passive house model in Latin America. Just to give you some numbers, today SHF Sustainable Portfolio Partnership has financed more than 900 million USD, benefits more than 300,000 people, with approximately 86,000 homes built in 80% of the Mexican states, reducing 2,800 metric tons of CO2 emissions, contributing to achieve Mexico's climate commitment and with a direct impact in more than 8 sustainable development goals. In addition, it's important to mention that EcoCasa program, part of H's portfolio, has recognized last year by the Climate Bond Initiative as proxy for low carbon residential building in Mexico. This certification allows developers to issue a green bond back in EcoCasa projects. So the Sustainable Housing Partnership's success has been possible due in strong collaboration links with national and international organizations that include international funding, governmental institutions, developers, construction chambers, and commercial links. Today, more than 390 million funding has been received to operate the program, plus 100 million funding proposal to add new sustainable programs like retrofit, urbanization, and microfinance. This portfolio has demonstrated to be an initiative with high level of sustainability and has been replicable in the example of countries like in Chile, Colombia, Argentina, Nigeria, Brazil, and some others in Central America. So the main objective change the conventional way of home construction towards sustainable vision that improve people's lives. That's it.
Muchas gracias. Thank you, Edith, for these words about Mexico. And the scale of your intervention is quite large. It's really interesting to hear. I would like to now turn to a voice from the private sector. And I'm really pleased, Brendan, that you accepted our invitation to join us here. It's probably very early for you, so thank you also for being here with us. Also for you, Edith, I realized that you are getting up really early in your part of the world. So, Brendan, Fifth Wall, you are the first, according to your website, you are the first and largest venture capital firm advising corporates on and investing in built world technology. So can you tell us a bit more about that role, how you connect capital with the innovators and developers, and yeah, from your vantage point, how do you help the sector really drive that transformation? And please do feel free to pick up also on some of the comments that were made before by the other speakers. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. I guess a bit of background. So Fifth Wall is exactly as you said, the largest, the most active venture capital fund focusing on innovations and technologies for the real estate sector, the built environment. And we actually started the fund focused on software and hardware that could just improve the operations of real estate. And it was about a couple years ago that I realized, obviously, some of these startling stats that actually it isn't transportation, it isn't manufacturing, it's in fact real estate that is the single most contributive industry to climate change. In the US, it's responsible for 40% of CO2 emissions, 40% of energy consumption, 40% of all raw materials consumption. And most of where we had historically focused was on software that didn't have a decarbonization imperative to improve the real estate industry. But I started to ask real estate owners, what are you doing about this enormous problem, right? There's an enormous amount of capital that needs to be deployed into R&D, technology and innovation, to decarbonize the sector. And the shocking thing was most of them were doing nothing. Actually nothing. Some of the largest owners and operators and developers of real estate in the US and globally, corporations, were doing nothing. There was no investment in R&D. Now, what there was acquisition and purchasing of existing technology. But what you see in other sectors is that the private sector, corporations, invest an enormous amount in R&D to improve the entire sector, right? We've seen this in automotive, right, with Tesla, where Tesla deployed an enormous amount of capital into R&D, built an enormous competitive advantage over its peers, and obviously has kind of thrust the industry forward through competitive dynamics to decarbonize the automotive industry. That is not happening in real estate. And just to put the stats into context, it's estimated that in the US, it's going to require $50 trillion, with a T, trillion dollars to decarbonize the economy. Real estate's roughly 40% of that. So figure it's going to cost $20 trillion to decarbonize the real estate sector. And an enormous amount of that needs to go into R&D. Why? Because today, even if we deployed the best technologies into our commercial assets, we'd only get about halfway towards carbon zero, meaning the best solutions, even if we forgot ROI and we forgot positive payback periods, we didn't care about any of that. We were just concerned about decarbonizing. We could only get about halfway there. And the delta, the gap, is only going to be closed with new investments into technology. But the real estate industry in the US has historically only invested less than $100 million into R&D for climate tech. And so there was this kind of massive breakdown in capital markets, which we saw, which is why is the real estate industry not investing into the R&D to decarbonize itself? And that is actually where we saw an opportunity to kind of bring the real estate industry together for the first time, to build an enormous pool of capital to deploy into the very technologies that can close that 50% gap and actually close some of that gap towards the $18 trillion. So, our firm exists to do that. Like why we started our climate tech fund, our unique model of working with these large owners and operators and developers of real estate is premised on that. So it's obviously an enormous opportunity. I think our fund will be one part of a broader solution, but the real estate industry needs to change the way it self-conceptualizes from being a kind of cash flow driven business to being an R&D driven business, because the amount it needs to invest into the R&D to decarbonize is staggering. And right now, it's nowhere.
Thank you, Brendan. These are very powerful words and comments. I would like to take the positive note. We can already achieve 50% of reductions with what exists. And that is our 2030 target. So I'm hopeful, but it needs collaboration, as you say. And then really interesting, your focus on, so how do we get the last mile? How do we get really to full decarbonization? And there, I hope we can maybe work more on that also together, because we're very much focusing, so how do we get to net zero? And what is the driver from real estate? I hope to come afterwards to some of the challenges and barriers you all face, and especially in dealing with the real estate industry. But before that, I'd like to come to you, Kelly. The Laudes Foundation Capital Markets Program, you have obviously you're economy-wide, but you do have also a particular focus on the built environment. And again, I picked that up from your website. You speak about redefining value for the good of all. So from an investor's perspective and looking at the built environment, what redefinition needs to happen? I mean, I fully agree with you. We need to change the way we value buildings and investments, but I'd like to hear from you how we do that.
Thank you. Let me begin with a bit of a more macro response to that than simply the built environment. As we all know, particularly those of us who've worked in finance, value is typically perceived as profit or price. And it's only, I'd say recently, where we really can look at value as an impact or a positive dividend for people, for nature, for climate. And so it's really that broader perspective that we're looking to manifest and drive forward economically. Excuse me. But I wanted to also pick up on the investment gap, which Brendan talked about a bit. Within the European context, there's a 3.5 trillion investment that's required to renovate Europe's building stock to meet climate law targets. That is an estimated funding gap per year of 227 billion euros to 2030, which of course makes private investment identification and incentivization central. And then the last thing, just to put this in context, is 97% of Europe's buildings, as many as 215 million, will require some level of renovation before 2050. And so if that's required, if that's where the investment gap is, the opportunity to really look at value in a much more holistic way as that capital flow flows into the sector is really significant. And I agree, there is absolutely a need for R&D, but also innovation with regards to how we look at policy and subsidies and incentives as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kelly. I would like to pick up from some of the comments I get over Slido, so thank you for either in the room or the people online, but maybe taking some of them together. What are some of the biggest barriers, but also opportunities, but especially barriers you are seeing? But on the one hand, in the developing countries, where you are mainly active with AFD and the PEEB, and maybe also hearing from Mexico, when you address this with the private sector, when you address these issues with the very people who build. And maybe flipping this over, there is also a question maybe on the retrofit challenge. I personally feel we need a new narrative on the retrofit. We're stuck. And so I'd be maybe curious if Kelly, you could react to that, or also Brendan. So maybe we start with the first one, particularly Jose and Edith, and then the second one, Kelly and Brendan. Jose, you want to go first?
Yeah. I would say the main barrier for me is the lack of awareness of public decision makers. For the private sector, the reluctance to invest or to incorporate in their investment an energy efficiency component is more linked with the lack of maturity of the market for energy efficiency in these countries. And when I say lack of maturity, is not only in terms of technique, but also in terms of skills to design properly and properly conduct project construction or project retrofitting. So I would say that there is a convergent environment that creates some resistance for energy efficiency. The second point, I can see that we are operating in developing countries, and the key word is development. The market and the society is asking for facilities, social facilities for education, for health, for housing, and so there is the process is rapid, and there is a lack of sometimes of time for really doing things properly. This is also something we can and the third is that the development is currently under constraints in terms of finance access. And for instance, if you have a program for the construction of 50 primary schools, but it costs 100, let's say. If you incorporate all the energy efficiency measures that will save energy, but not only save energy, increase the comfort. Maybe with this equivalent budget, you will have 48 primary schools. And it's a deal. The minister has a commitment.
Yeah.
He should deliver 50 schools, not 48. Who pays for the difference? So we have another issue, is investment grant. Or we combine loans, finance, classic finance, with the sufficient level of investment grant to start the process. And in many countries, still these resources, investment grant resources are missing. So the time to convince project sponsor, and in particular private, but also public sponsor, is a long process.
Thank you, Jose. Very well described. Edith, what are some of the key challenges that you face in your work in Mexico?
I agree a little with Jose, points that he put on the table. I think some of them have to do, on one side, we have to go further with education, with people, with constructors, and with financial intermediaries. Also, the lack of skills, technical skills. We've been granting technical assistance, and we can still see that there's a lot of there's a big hole regarding sustainable skills. And the other one that we have faced, and I think it has been one of the points that allow us to give all these solutions that we are already working with, is the financial cost of it. So what we are doing is to put at the same level, the financial cost of a housing with all these sustainable properties compared to a regular home. So this has allowed us to show to constructors and to housing developers that we can achieve all these sustainable goals. But still, we're still working, as developing country, we have, this will be in the side of the formal construction side, but still we have a big objective to go through the retrofit and also with the microfinance product. As you know, mostly in developing countries, more than 50% of the housing solutions, they are self-construction housing solutions. So we have a big objective to go to this new point for us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Edith. Coming to the maybe other part of the world where the retrofit challenge is much higher, and I do appreciate in all countries we start looking at the retrofit challenge, but it is the one really Europe, North America, where we see that's really needed. Where, Kelly and Brendan, could you maybe talk a bit to that? How do we tackle that? You want to go first?
Maybe I'll.
Yeah.
I'm happy to go first. I think the themes that are critical here are ones that we've heard from each of our speakers. There's a massive need and an ability to do education, to work within the government regulatory environment, and to bring together the different players, right? I mean, this is a story of climate impact, better profits, and overall better cash flow and savings for businesses and residential, folks and families that are living in these houses. So being able to structure the incentives around why one would do the retrofit and to do it now, and to make sure that there's not a disconnect between owner versus tenant. I think that's a major opportunity. And I think that we can also create opportunities within the financial products around incentivization, potentially lower interest rates as well. Mm-hmm. So this is about opportunity, but I think it happens across climate finance. Getting the different elements of the value chain to work together and to understand the restrictions, but also the opportunities of each player is critical. So I'm sure you'd like to add to that, Brendan.
Yeah, Brendan, I could imagine that retrofit is part of your portfolio somehow. There is new business models that are needed, so I'm curious to hear from you.
Yeah, I mean, again, just to point out how staggering the opportunity is, positively and negatively, it's going to cost $20 trillion to decarbonize US assets over the next few decades. US GDP is $21 trillion. So figure 1 year of US GDP goes into decarbonizing the existing building stock over the next 20 to 30 years. I mean, to contextualize that further, the entire internet is $2 trillion. So this is one of the largest economic opportunities that's ever been created. And I think you can view that positively and negatively. And I'll focus actually on both, because I think to drive behavior, you both need the carrot and the stick. And I think we kind of know the stick here, and I think it's being talked about, which is today capital markets are saying we will favorably or we will preferentially deploy capital to low or no carbon footprint real estate. And that is having a kind of circular effect. You're also seeing federal, international, and local regulators put in carbon fines and carbon neutrality laws in different jurisdictions. And real estate is inherently the hardest industry to move, i.e. if you don't like the local regulations in New York City, the owner of the Empire State Building can't move that building to a more favorable jurisdiction. It's based in place. So you're subject very much so to regulation. And I think the last, kind of stick element of it is that you are seeing this from tenants and consumers, meaning the largest consumers of space are making enormous decarbonization pledges. So when Amazon commits to decarbonizing and carbon neutrality, what is not totally understood often is that it's committing its entire supply chain to decarbonizing. And one of the largest suppliers to Amazon is the real estate industry in the form of industrial and logistics warehouses, of data centers, offices, retail stores. And so the real estate industry is receiving this pressure in a kind of stick-oriented way. On the carrot side, I think there's enormous opportunity, meaning I don't want to only paint this in a negative context. There's an opportunity for a Tesla of real estate to emerge, meaning for one or many real estate organizations to invest an enormous amount in R&D, build a real differential competitive advantage in decarbonizing, and have enormous cost of capital advantages over time, right? You've seen this in other industries where an industry or one player in an industry invests an enormous amount in R&D, builds a defensible competitive advantage, and capital markets in turn reward that organization or that firm with a lower cost of capital. We haven't really seen that today in the real estate industry. And so I think what's important is that you need to appeal to both, right, to drive this kind of staggering economic investment of $20 trillion into the building sector to decarbonize and to retrofit. So I think it's important that when you look at this holistically, I think a lot of where people focus tends to be on the negative, on the stick side of it, but there is a way of shifting the narrative towards the offensive carrot side of it in terms of building real estate organizations that are singularly the best at retrofitting, and in so doing build an enormous capital moat and cost of capital advantage over their peers. We just haven't seen that yet, but I would anticipate that that will emerge over the next 5 to 10 years in different geographies, in different sectors, and across different asset classes.
Thank you, Brandon. I'm convinced as well. Yeah, please. Thank you. You get some applause for this one. As we see many companies taking these net zero carbon commitments, and as you say, they start realizing how much of their footprint is in the built environment, we will start seeing these signals come, and I think the problem will turn into opportunity. And yeah, we will remember that you're one of the first in this market, and I think it's really an important one to tackle. Time is always against us. Unfortunately, I really, we would get more in depth now in our conversation. Could I maybe ask all of you, just briefly, we're doing this here under the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction. We need to decarbonize the built environment around the world. It's the 40%, as Mathilde said initially. Do you have any recommendations to us, especially the PEEB, who is driving the finance and policy work under the Global Alliance? Any recommendations you would have to us? What can we do more, better, we should stop doing? Maybe Jose to start?
It's not easy because what you are doing well. So just maybe to increase visibility on the commitment of your members, maybe to get them more visible, and in particular those countries that join the Global Alliance at the very beginning to understand or to show how they are now operating, acting in this field, and yes, to see more visibility on your members, maybe.
Thank you. Yes.
But just because we need also to have feedback from their own activities to understand how the efforts are being shared among different countries, regions, and typologies also of buildings.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Edith?
Yes, I guess that this is a work team. You know, as a governmental agency, actually for us it was just the opposite. The government started doing all these sustainable initiatives. So as today, the result is due to the work together with the private sector, and to keep showing the results. You know, we started with one home developer, and right now we have a big number of home developers doing all these sustainable housing solutions. So it's just keep working, and this is not a team effort. I guess that's the thing. You know, it's a governmental private team effort, and also to take all the international initiatives and to keep looking forward to develop and to introduce new skills into the market.
Thank you. Kelly?
So going back to your comment at the beginning about the need for a new narrative, I do think that that is an amazing opportunity. And I think the opportunity needs to be developed both from a developer, but also a user perspective. What I find is that often there's not a great demand for, or at least the voice of demand is not aggregated.
Yeah.
So those tenants that may be living, or owners that may be looking after assets that need to be retrofitted aren't really sold on the upside and the benefits. And I also think that's obviously true in the new build area as well. But the thing that I think is most critical is getting the different stakeholders in the room. And I would really encourage you to get philanthropy in the room, because philanthropy can be a convener of atypical stakeholders and often competitors. And also, philanthropy is 100% lost capital. So when you think of the opportunities of what you can leverage if you don't need a financial return, the creativity is really an open door that I would encourage you to push against.
Thank you. We'll take up the offer for sure. Thanks. Brennan.
So, I mean, I think there's I totally agree with the point about changing the narrative. I mean, I think there's one part of today's narrative that's embarrassing and humiliating as the real estate industry. I mean, I presented the stat that, roughly $20 trillion is going to have to go in to retrofitting existing US building stock to achieve carbon neutrality. And today, the real estate industry has historically only invested in total 100 million, right? That's humiliating, that's embarrassing. And there's a way to lean into that, I think, to drive behavior, but I don't think it's the only thing to do. And I think the important thing to note is that real estate organizations, the private sector, does need to solve this in a positive context. And we should be celebrating those real estate organizations that actually start doing this, even if small. And, what's interesting is, for real estate organizations that have predominantly been so cash flow driven, private sector real estate organizations, investing into R&D and climate tech is a super unnatural act. It's foreign to them. It's very difficult for them to do, and yet they have done it. And so what I think we need to do more of is celebrating those organizations that do that. And I'll start. There are some real estate organizations in the US that have invested into climate tech and R&D to decarbonize, right? Something almost no other real estate organizations have done. Organizations like Ivanhoe Cambridge and Hudson Pacific and Equity Residential and Kimco and Invitation Homes, they've actually invested in our fund as real estate corporations to invest in the tech to decarbonize. And so I think in changing the narrative, it's important to not only have it lean negative, but also have it lean positive. And I think a big part of that is we should start celebrating real estate organizations that do this unnatural act of investing into the technology to decarbonize, because it's such a huge mindset shift. And in so doing, we'll encourage more real estate owners to do the same. And that is the cycle we're trying to break into today.
Thank you, Brendan. Yeah, we need that positive narrative, celebratory rather than accusing. Thank you. I'd really like to thank you, especially Edith and Brendan, for making it so early, and I hope you'll have a first coffee after this. And thank you all for having come here, and we'll see each other.